Hello, and welcome to Shipping Accessibility with AI. My name is Wilco Fiers.
And I'm Noe Barrell. Thanks for tuning in today.
This is the first time you're joining us. This is a series on engineering, for engineering and product leadership. We will be talking about how to work and improve with AI in digital accessibility.
And according to Wilco, this might be about
Yeah,
ships.
we'll see. We'll see. No way. So let's get into our topic for today. Today, I'd like to discuss the impact of AI in digital accessibility. Before we get started, though, just some quick information about ourselves. Noah, do you want to get us started? Tell the audience a little bit about
Yeah,
yourself.
sure. Yeah, so my name is Noe, and I've been working at Deque for 7 years. I'm a machine learning engineer here. Basically, my job throughout my time here has been to figure out how we can apply AI and machine learning to advance what we do at Deque, which is primarily accessibility testing. So I started out training an object detection model to understand user interface semantics, and now with all the advancements in generative AI, things have taken off quite a bit with our AI operations. And yeah, the same to you, Wilco. Why don't you introduce
Yeah,
yourself?
so I've been in digital accessibility for almost 20 years now. I started off with lots and lots of audits, like many accessibility specialists do. And that got me interested in accessibility tooling. Back in the day, there were only a couple tools out there, and they were nowhere near as good as I really needed them to be as an auditor. And I've had some technical backgrounds, and that got me interested in, all right, let's do some tool development myself. So I got involved in some open source accessibility tooling. And then Deque launched Axe Core, which is like right now the most popular accessibility testing tool out there. And I thought that is something I absolutely need to get involved with. So that's how I got started at Deque, and that's been 10 years now. Um, but today isn't just about accessibility. We'd like to talk a little bit about the developments that AI have brought to this space. So, Noe, can you tell me a little bit about in the last couple of years, how has this field developed? Um, like, what has changed since you got started at Deque, and how has that shaped like the profession that we've all known?
Yeah. So with AI in general, I mean, there's been a lot of changes since I started. I mean, first when I started in 2019, AI was really starting to take off, I would say, but we were still at the point where everything, like all of the state of the art, was open sourced. You could go and read any paper, and usually the code was linked to some GitHub repository, and these were like specialized AI models, maybe a specific um, neural network that's trained to detect to convert screenshots of code to HTML, and it's trained with a very specific purpose in mind. And at this point in time, everything was open source, and the papers were available for everything. And if you wanted to train them, and this is still sort of the case for certain applications, but if you wanted to get something done with AI, you had to collect all the data yourself. You had to create a special UI to label that data, and then you had to grind through the training and refinement process for a very long time. And now with the development of larger language models, you don't quite have to do that for every application anymore. You can kind of get the results you're looking for by just prompting or zero shotting a large language model. And so that's for me, that's certainly changed a lot about my job in AI. Um, and now you can use these large language models to help you generate data for more specialized tasks that you might need. And then with regards to software development, I think we can all understand how much things have changed. I mean, in the last few years, we've gone from large language models that you use to generate a specific function. You maybe would have in 2022's prompted a model to generate a 10 to 15 line function, and you would have described in detail the algorithm that you wanted it to use. And that very targeted use of these large language models would have been at the time relatively effective for getting software development done. But now, with more capable models that are able to have a much longer accomplish much longer tasks, it's not so much about. I mean, if you're doing it correctly, you should still define the approach you want it to take. But often it's more about, for a lot of people, it's more about defining the outputs, and you can kind of sit back a lot more and define the outputs that you want the software to have, and then work in collaboration with a large language model, to achieve that end goal. And I think I know a lot of software developers who are saying now that it's been months or maybe even a full year since they've written code themselves, and um, yeah, things have changed quite a lot over the last few years in terms of software development. Um, so yeah, I'm curious how you think AI is shaping accessibility.
I I think there's a lot that's a very big question too. I think there's a lot that has happened. Easily the most noticeable impact to the lives of people with disabilities is the technologies around Be My Eyes, where AI is being used to recognize what's on people's phones. People use a camera and the Be My Eyes app and send out what the video or the image that they have, and have the AI describe what's going on. And that has been a massive game changer for people, like where previously Be My Eyes was run by volunteers. This is now a solution that is like that the volunteer solution really limited how much use you could get out of that. And by having AI, you can people are now able to get around things, find have labels described to them, have environments described to them. It is a tremendous improvement to a lot of people's lives. um, there's lots of other smaller applications in accessibility too. Screen readers now have the ability to summarize pages for you. AI is really good at summarizing pages, or just in general at summarization tasks. Description tasks is also something that it is relatively competent at. So, and this is more like this is being explored both by browsers and by assistive technologies. So there's automated captioning. It has become a thing. Automated image descriptions has become a thing. These are technologies that are still, I would say, not at the mature stage yet. They're increasingly, they're becoming increasingly competent at this tech. Um, but you see, there's these all of these steps are increasingly improving um, what people are able to do. Just the assistive technologies, the capabilities within of these technologies is getting better and better and better all the time. And just the kind of things that used to require humans can now be done by just assistive technologies, and that is a fantastic innovation. Um, on the development side too, um, testing is another aspect that we are at DQ particularly excited about.
Yeah, so how is it changing how we at DQ, and I mean the industry as a whole, approach digital accessibility testing? Because I think a lot of people assume that testing is just testing, but what's actually different now with AI as it is?
Right. So, I mean, testing is still testing, right? But what the direction these things are going is we're now taking work that used to require human testing, and we're starting to give that information, starting to ask those questions to AI models, so that instead of having humans find all of the answers, you're putting humans in an evaluation role. You're checking the answers that the AI gave you, which speeds things up a lot. So with that, it can do a lot of the questions. The way it works best is by taking the larger, complicated testing tasks and breaking them down into small, incremental kind of questioning steps. So where an accessibility specialist might evaluate a component for its accessible name, its role, and its state, you would ask an AI model to evaluate, given the context of this element, is this an appropriate role? If yes, then you can move on and ask, hey, then, all right, is the information that we have about the state, is this expanded? Is this a collapsed component? Is this a checked element? So there's these granular questions that you can hand off to the AI, and then the result of that you can present to humans for a last proof check, as a way to just confirm that the AI get this right, that the AI understand this correctly. And this tremendously speeds up the testing process. So it moves the role of humans from doing the grunt work into confirming that the AI tools did it the way it's supposed to be, and then correcting where it did make the mistakes.
Yeah. And I think also the ability for AI to understand
Hmm.
images using LLMs, that feels like a huge unlock.
Absolutely.
How does that change what we can test today versus like, even
Hmm.
2 years
Yeah,
ago?
so I really got started into AI and accessibility before, like right before that cutoff point where image evaluation was still very much its own sphere and its own thing, and the large language models would really only accept text. But the ability to give it images is a tremendous help in accessibility testing. You can the HTML behind web pages is a very, very noisy thing. So giving that kind of information to an AI in terms of context can trip it up really easily. Whereas if you're able to give it a screenshot of a web page, that provides so much contextual information that's almost impossible to give in any sort of other way. Um, it is an essential component to a lot of testing. So being able to understand, like, images is the classic one. If you want to evaluate the text alternative of an image, you really need to understand the context in which that image sits. A picture of a lady walking in a beautiful gown requires a very different text alternative, a bit depending on what the context is. If that page is about the image, it's about the lady herself. It may be sufficient to put her name in it. If this is a page about fashion, you may want a thorough description of the dress. If this is some kind of news event, you may want to actually focus on what's in the background and not the person in front of it. The context is critical, and having the ability to send images into a thinking and reasoning model allows these tools to understand what's going on. That contextual information that we're able to give by providing images is a really important additional tool that we've had. Um, One of the things I'm most interested that you're probably better equipped to answer is how did the newer models like there's constantly new models are coming out. How it is getting more capable. What like there's this basic feature things like it can now deal with images, but they're just getting smarter too. So how are you seeing that change? What we are able to do with accessibility testing?
Right. Yeah, there's a variety of different things that I think about here. The first of these is obviously that these models are, as they get more capable, able to carry out longer tasks with success. They are able to uh, carry out more complicated tasks, and they're able to just better understand things with fewer hallucinations. So this means, in terms of testing, this means that they might be able to follow a more complicated flow within a user interface. And their ability to understand images better now means that they might be able to understand the intentions behind a user interface better, and actually understand whether or not it's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust to a user. They might be able to better understand the implications of the way a website is designed as it relates to assistive technology. But then one of the other ways I like to think about it too is the economic viability of models. As they get better, it's not just that models are getting better; it's that models are getting better and cheaper. And so this makes testing more viable economically, because you might be able to test a website thoroughly, but each component on the website that you test, if it costs $10 or $20 to prompt an LLM to do so, that kind of gets out of the realm of economic viability. But what we're finding is that these smaller models have gotten significantly more capable, and you can now, for fractions of a cent, run certain assessments on components of a user interface, and I think that is really unlocking a lot for our ability to test complicated web pages and to just increase automation. Is as kind of a blanket. Um, and so I think the capability and the economic viability together both unlock a lot in terms of testing accessibility.
That's very interesting. So we've been building accessibility tools for many years. In the last at least eight, we've been looking at how do we incorporate AI into those tools to do more accessibility testing. So, what goes into building a good, high quality accessibility testing tool with AI? What are some of the hard problems that you've had to face and had to solve in doing this work? No way.
Yeah, this is a good question. So I suppose it might be good to back up and talk about how we started out. So the first my first project here at DQ was to train an object detection model, um, basically a convolutional neural network that we train it to detect all of the user interface components on a web page based on their visual appearance. So this is things like icons, text buttons, headings, input fields. This essentially required very specialized um, data. We needed to collect. We couldn't just rely on the markup because, as you know, the markup semantics aren't necessarily reliable. So we had to, with human labelers, label and annotate tens of thousands of screenshots of user interfaces, and then train a convolutional neural network to detect what the semantics of each element was. And this was a very targeted approach that we used in Axe DevTools. The first place we used it was in our interactive elements IGT, where we basically verify that the programmatic role matches the semantic role, the visual semantic role. And so this was a very targeted application of an AI model, and we did so with a human in the loop. They could verify whether or not the AI model was correct, and the goal of this was that we could increase coverage in a very targeted way by detecting places where there was a role mismatch or where the role was missing and suggest what that role should be. Um, and I think the approach today hasn't really changed that much in terms of, we keep the human in the loop and we use it in targeted ways to achieve specific things. We don't just take the user interface and tell a large language model, okay, find all the accessibility issues, make no mistakes this
Yeah.
time. You know, we
I've seen
we
people try that. It
we
is
we
not
use like
ideal.
yeah. Um, we use AxDev tools as what's called a harness, essentially. So it gathers very specific pieces of information, and then we run very specific checks based on what we're able to find in within the document. And so the hard problems are I think for testing accessibility, as you know, it's kind of a long tail problem because, like I said, you can't just throw an LLM at a website and expect it to find all the issues. You need to come up with um, a specific case for each kind of issue, and you need to instruct models to be able to look for that certain thing, and you need to gather all the right context for that to test for that specific thing. um, and so our approach is to start with the highest impact and items first. So the first one we're starting with is name, role, and value.
Very common accessibility
Because
problem.
that is
Yeah.
super high impact and occurs super commonly. And it's one that we can do relatively well by using images as well, and large language models. And so the hard problems are that it's so complex, and there's so many different things to consider. Um, and and so coming up with a specific like process that you can follow to test for each one, I would say is a big part of the challenge
Yeah.
here. But where our approach to that is to start with the highest impact issues first, and then slowly work our way down the long tail of
Yeah,
accessibility
I think
issues.
you're absolutely right. Accessibility is a very long tail problem, and I think it is also a very nuanced and complicated topic, which is why breaking it down into smaller pieces is always the way to go. It's you want to have a lot of examples, you want to be able to give the AI all the instructions that it needs to make those nuanced decisions. In one of the hard parts, like I've noticed this, is even in switching models, you run into issues. Like one model isn't another model, so you need to update your prompts. These prompts are almost hard coded to the model, so there's a lot of work in that too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
All right.
Well, I think that about covers what we plan to discuss today.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody for joining us, and remember to subscribe if you want to get more of these discussions in the
Thank you so
future.
much. And thanks, everybody. I do want to ask everybody a little favor. We are looking for stories on how AI is changing your lives in digital accessibility. So if you have some ideas, some insights, some hot tips that maybe nobody else has looked into, drop them down in the comments below. Thank you very much.